I'm here to present for discussion 3 documents that differ generically, but all serve to document the accidental defloration of prepubescent girls. In common halachic parlance, each such document affirms that the girl in question is Mukat Ets, struck by wood, or Woodstruck. The 3 documents are from 16th century Italy. I want to explore with you the social and cultural significance of this kind of document. The workshop format is particularly appropriate and stimulating for my project because while I will be sharing with you my own thoughts and conjectures, I'll be particularly generous in bestowing upon you my perplexities, and I hope to go home with a pile of ideas and suggestions with which to pursue this inquiry. A few words of halachic background. One of the surprising features of the Woodstruck deed is that the concept is neither new nor esoteric. The 3rd Mishnah in the 1st chapter of Ketubot records a difference of opinion between Rabbi Meir and the sages about the amount of the ketubah of a Woodstruck girl. Rabbi Meir asserts that her ketubah is valued at 200 dinar, namely the value of a virgin, while the sages maintain that its value is only 100 dinar, like the value of a widow or a non-virgin. Later in the same chapter, in Mishnah 7, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer say that a girl is to be believed if she claims that she lost her virginity accidentally, but Rabbi Yoshua claims that she is presumed to have had intercourse unless she can prove her claim. This is only one of several Mishnahs in this chapter of Ketubot in which the same rabbis disagree over the same issue, namely whether the wife's or the husband's claim is to be believed, and which of them must bear the burden of proof. For example, in the previous Mishnah, a bride claims following her wedding night that she was raped after the engagement, while her husband charges her with having had intercourse prior to the betrothal and tricking him into the engagement, in which case her ketubah would be worthless. Focusing on the case at hand, the Mishnah says nothing about chronology, that is, at what point in time the groom or the husband discovers his wife's non-virginity. It just airs the 2 views on the value of her ketubah. The Gemara raises the possibility in Ravah's name that the timing did matter to the sages. Supposedly, if the knowledge was made available only after the wedding night, they hold that she gets nothing, because her husband is judged to have been misled. Apparently, Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer made no such distinction, valued her ketubah at 200 dinar, regardless of this factor. But Ravah's suggestion falls in the course of the discussion, and more precisely, he's held to have withdrawn it, and the conclusion is that the Mishnah is to be read without regard to the timing of the revelation. This is a fairly straightforward discussion with a clear conclusion, and which is duly noted in the medieval literature. Al-Fasi declares that the sage's position is law, the authoritative codes follow suit, Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, Jacob ben Asher's Arba'at Turim, Joseph Caro's Shulchan Aruch. Throughout the Middle Ages, there's virtually no responsa literature on this topic. The case of the Woodstruck bride is a non-issue. This is partly what makes the material from 16th century Italy curious. Our colleague, Kenneth Stowe, published 2 volumes of regesta of documents drawn up by Roman Jewish notaries, primarily Giuda Piatelli and his son Isaac, currently stored in Rome's Archivio Storico Capitolino. Stowe notes that the notarial files contain over 100 documents recording the accidental defloration of young girls for the 16th century alone. Clearly, the Woodstruck deed was quite popular among Roman Jewry, and the question is, why? Why did parents rush to record their daughter's defloration in an official document? What was the social significance of the Woodstruck deed, and what does its remarkable popularity convey? Roni Weinstein maintains that the Rome documents reveal, quote, a considerable rise in the number of accidents entailing a loss or suspicion of loss of virginity. I can't confirm this. No such trend is evident in the corpus of deeds listed by Stowe, and we have no comparable body of data for earlier periods. As an alternative, Einstein ponders whether the documents point to waves of family hysteria affecting many families with daughters on the brink of matchmaking. I have no other evidence to support this suggestion, but even if it could be proved, we would then have to explain this situation, and it wouldn't help us that much. Many of the notarial documents bear the title, that is to say, the documents listed in Ken's volumes, mikre bilti tahor. Impure.
That's in the text itself.
Oh yeah, in impure. I didn't mean that you added it. No. Right. The expression also appears in Vienna's responsum, which I distributed. The biblical source of this expression is 1 Samuel 20:26, from the prophetic portion read in the synagogue when Rosh Chodesh falls on a Saturday. We read there that David absents himself from the royal table, and King Saul assumes that he did so to avoid polluting the meal, since he had not yet purified himself through ritual immersion after having had a nocturnal emission. Clearly our sources are not about nocturnal emission, but they are about pollution and purification insofar as bleeding renders women impure. And admittedly, this connection between the expression mikre bilti tahor and the Woodstruck deeds is weak. Can suggest a more sinister interpretation, conjecturing that the cases involve child abuse. Okay. This is clearly true for... I'm going to emphasize Magda's point about keeping your comments brief. That's okay. This is clearly true for the 6-year-old Simcha who lost her virginity after falling from a bench. Her notarial record says that while she stood on the bench holding a pomegranate, a young man named Angelo, quote, wanted to play, l'tzachek, with her, and he put out his hand and seized her arm. She, however, did not want to play, and between one thing and another, she fell from the bench and cried out, and her virginity was lost, end quote. Playing, as Stowe notes, is a biblical euphemism for sexual activity, and so this case seems to involve sexual assault in some form. But I think it's going too far to assert that this perspective arises in nearly every similar text. In fact, this is the only case in those 2 volumes that presents evidence of abuse. But as with Roni's theory, even if Ken's theory is true, it only begs the question, because then we have to wonder, well, what's going on in 16th century Rome? Why are there all these cases of child abuse, and why are they handled in this particular way? So it doesn't help me enough. This is the state of scholarship as far as I know, and the jumping off point for my discussion, our discussion. The questions are both simple and perplexing. Why are there so many Woodstruck deeds in the Rome archive? What social situation underlies these texts? And more important, or more broadly, what can we learn from these documents about sexuality, marriage, family life, and social life in the early modern era? How are these concepts and institutions perceived by Jews in early modern society, and how are they translated into social norms? Basically, the purpose of the Woodstruck deed is to provide proof that a girl did not lose her virginity through premarital sex. Her family might produce the document at the time of her engagement, or in response to a morning after complaint by her future groom or his family. In short, the Woodstruck deed is a kind of insurance policy against the possibility of a future threat to the honor of the bride and her family. This seems like a reasonable step to take, and one of the peculiar aspects of the Woodstruck deed is that it does not appear earlier in the Jewish world. No such document has been found in the Cairo Geniza, nor have marriage contracts of Woodstruck girls survived in the Geniza. I'm thinking about Goitein's volumes, and of course Mordechai Akiva. There's no Woodstruck deed in the formularies compiled by Sadia Gaon or Judah ben Barzilai. Isaac Dampier, the leading Tosafist, asserts that the case of the Woodstruck maiden is rare. His views echoed by generations of subsequent experts. Maybe so. Perhaps this explains the dearth of halachic material on the topic. But then we want to know why 16th century Rome is different. What changed in Jewish society or in Jewish culture to produce this new type of document? Let us assume that the incidence of accidental defloration, whatever it was a constant among the Jews of Europe in the Middle Ages and the early modern era, Jacob Katz's traditional society. If so, the novelty that gave rise to the Woodstruck deed would be found not in the sexual mores of Jewish society, but in its norms of documentation. Or to put it differently, the place of writing in Jewish society. Our 3 documents indicate that typically a girl's family proved she was Woodstruck by producing verbal testimony from respectable women, who either witnessed the incident or at least examined the girl's injury and verified the sudden accidental defloration. I suppose that the deed was drawn up because of a concern that during the years separating the incident from a girl's marriage, something might happen to prevent the witnesses from testifying. But why now? This concern should have troubled Jewish families from time immemorial. Nevertheless, the Woodstruck deed is a 16th century novelty. That the Woodstruck deed was novel is apparent from its generic diversity. The texts I'm presenting include a rabbinic responsum, and I thank Roni Weinstein for the reference to Vienna, and an entry from a communal record book, as well as the notarial deed from Rome. Collectively, they depict the situation in flux, with people exploring different venues or avenues by which to affirm their daughter's chastity and salvage the family honor. Azriel Vienna, the author of our first document, concedes that female testimony is only admissible in cases involving laws legislated by the sages, not biblical laws. But he maintains that disputes surrounding a woman's marriage contract fall under that rubric, and he therefore upholds the judicial value of the women's testimony, and he affirms it with his own signature. This is a fundamental issue. We should have found such a discussion hundreds of years earlier. Thus, Diana's discussion per se suggests that similar cases had never or rarely been heard before. The responsum is not a new genre, but it is not typically used for publication of this kind of document. Our second document, too, from the Pinkas of the Padua Jewish community, is a document in search of a home. A communal Pinkas typically contains communal ordinances, but this is a Maaseh Bet Din, a court decision. Let's also note that the child's father initially describes the accident, quote, at the beginning of a machzor belonging to him, end quote. Clearly, he was searching for an appropriate way to record what had happened, one that would still have credibility many years hence, and he must have decided that private annotation was inadequate and approached the rabbi, Archivolti, and his associates. The notarial registers of 16th century Rome are not only a new option for the Woodstruck deed, they are altogether new, if not unique, in Jewish history. Jews used notaries in the Middle Ages. Our texts are drawn up by Jewish notaries, writing in Hebrew. So far as I know, there's no precedent for that. I just want to qualify that by saying that, of course, I know that there is an institution that we call Sofer Mata, the town scribe who draws up documents. What the relationship between that concept and the concept of the notary is not clear to me. So that even if we have a parallel social analog, there's the issue of how one conceived or conceptualized this functionary is not the same thing. And that's something that I need to think about some more. The Woodstruck deed is part of an efflorescence of Hebrew judicial instruments in the early modern era. The compromesso, or shtar berurim, is another new kind of document. Documents like these appear in Sefer Lechol Chefetz, the all-purpose book, a formulary published by Eliezer Melli in Venice in 1552. Melli's formulary is a response to an explosion of documentation in the guise of the medieval Sefer HaShtarot, or formulary, resembling the one that Ruth Lamdan presented to us yesterday, and it's a great feeling to connect to so many things that I've been hearing in the past couple of days. This is what the workshop format allows. The emergence of new kinds of records reflects a formalization and bureaucratization of Jewish communal life in the early modern era. A precursor to this development is the creation, beginning in the 14th century, of a formal process of ordaining rabbis and granting them communal appointments, as Mordechai Boyer and Robert Bonfield have shown. The documentary side of this trend is particularly noticeable in Italy, where the keeping of public records developed earlier than in many other European countries. The Pinkas exemplifies this process of bureaucratization, which is also taking place elsewhere. For Poland, we have the Council of the Four Lands. Its record book begins in 1580. The bureaucratization of Jewish life carried with it, or was part of, an encroachment of the community, of public authority, upon private life. Just as rituals once private, death for instance, now become orchestrated by the community, so too information about one's personal life and activities now enter the public purview through the notary, communal government, and the rabbinic. Private life becomes subject to greater public supervision and intervention because the authorities now acquire long-term memory, the ability to acquire and store information about the lives of individuals. The Woodstruck deed and other private instruments present an interesting switch, because here the initiative is in the hands of the family or the individual rather than the authorities. Taking advantage of the new communal bureaucracy, the father or the family chooses to involve the rabbi, the court, or the notary, in his personal and family life, to extract from him a public record for his own purposes and to his own advantage. So they've learned to manipulate the system, the new system. If we approach the Woodstruck deed contextually rather than textually, we arrive at a fresh insight into the family life of Italian Jewry in the 16th century, although I have to say at the outset that I can't prove it. In the fourth text of my presentation, Isaac Lampronti, a rabbi, a physician from 18th century Ferrara, testifies that it often happens that a girl falls and injures herself, bleeding from the genitals, and the parents promptly arrange to obtain an official document signed by rabbis declaring her Woodstruck, although in fact her hymen may still be intact. Mordechai Tzahalon, a rabbinic contemporary, confirms Lampronti's observation, and so it seems that the Woodstruck deed continued to be popular in Italy throughout the early modern era. What I find striking is Lampronti's skepticism about the non-virginity of the girls in many of these cases. From the scenario he presents, it almost seems that parents are waiting for the accident to happen. Well, why would this be? Why would parents actually want such an accident to happen so they could rush to document it? Parents' behavior would make sense if they thought there was a real possibility that their little girl might have sex sometime between childhood and the bridal canopy, in which case a Woodstruck deed would come in handy to redeem the family honor. If such was indeed the case, the Woodstruck deed is still, as I said, a form of insurance, but it's insurance against a different kind of threat. How big a problem premarital sex was for the Jews of 16th century Italy, I don't know. Jewish men consorted with Christian women, mostly servant girls or prostitutes, before and after marriage. Less is known about the premarital sexual activity of Jewish girls. Rabbi Ovadia of Bartenura observed during his sojourn in Sicily that, quote, most affianced girls come pregnant to the bridal canopy, which suggests that virginity at marriage was not deemed important so long as the groom's family was confident that the groom had been her first partner. Similarly, the Candia statutes of 1238 state that a girl's fiancé often becomes a familiar presence in her house, so much so that he frequently socializes with her in private and ultimately engages with her in premarital sex. Among non-Jews in Renaissance Venice, as Guido Ruggiero demonstrated, only the higher echelons of society clung to the ideal of female virginity as a symbol of family honor. The lower classes accepted premarital sex as a common stage in the courting that led to marriage, and it was no cause for outcry so long as marriage did indeed result and the child is born into wedlock. Elizabeth Storr Cohen has worked on cases from 16th and 17th century Rome in which young men are prosecuted for stupro, deflowering a virgin against her will. Like Ruggiero, Cohen found that virginity was a currency on the marriage market. A young girl from an affluent family might find a husband even if she were deprived of her virginity, because her family could provide a substantial dowry. But a girl from a poor family, for a poor family, stupro is a disaster, unless defloration became a step along the path to betrothal and marriage. The same image of premarital sex as socially acceptable emerges from Sandra Cavallo and Simona Cerruti's study of early modern Piemonte. Here we find carnal coupling immediately following the issue of a marriage promise, that is, before the wedding. And here too, prenuptial impregnation did not result in a loss of honor. These scholars explain that this norm is rooted in Catholic doctrine, which granted legal weight to the promise of marriage. So long as the man promised marriage and the woman consented, sex between them is not considered fornication, even if it occurred before the actual sacrament of marriage. Premarital sex is also common elsewhere in Europe during the early modern era, according to Lawrence Stone. In Northwest Europe and in New England as well, we have bundling, a custom in which a couple that is courting spends the evening, sometimes the night, together, in private, in the dark, in bed, scantily clad. Anything can happen. Bundling. Sexual relations at this point are not uncommon, sometimes resulting in illegitimate births with no religious stigma or loss of honor. So that's the way Stone depicts the situation. According to Stone, in late 18th century England, a third of all brides are pregnant on their wedding day, and half of all first births are conceived out of wedlock. The Woodstruck deed may be an indication that the incidence of premarital sex is higher in 16th century Italy than before, but this would need to be confirmed by a broad range of sources, and it would also need to be explained. Perhaps age at marriage is relevant. If the age at marriage had risen, the likelihood of premarital sex would probably rise with it, but whether there was a rise in the age of marriage, I don't know. I find it odd, if not amazing, that I've been unable to find sources, primary or secondary, about accidental defloration in Christian society, since this should have been as much a problem for Christians as for Jews. I did find one source from the same time and place as the deeds of the Roman notaries. La Lozana Andaluza by Francisco Delicado, an Andalusian priest who lived in Rome for many years, was published in Venice in 1528. The heroine, Lozana, says that she lost her virginity as a young girl, quote, jumping over a wall without her mother's permission, she spilled blood from her nature for the first time. Lozana is a wildly promiscuous woman who lies about how she lost her virginity in order to cover up her sexual activity. The point is that the rupture of the hymen made it impossible to verify a girl's chastity, and hence defloration, even accidental defloration, opened the door to promiscuity, or to charges of promiscuity. This suggests that even the Woodstruck deed could not entirely salvage a family's honor. And maybe that's why the case of the Woodstruck maiden is called Mikre Bilti Tahor. The sixth responsum of Rabbi Mari Mintz, or Rabbi Yehuda Mintz of 16th century Padua, reflects this state of heightened virginity anxiety. Mintz mentions that in Padua it is common for the sheep stained with the blood of defloration to be exhibited to the groom's mother and her female companions following the wedding. This is a biblical practice, but not one commonly found in medieval Europe. And its appearance in the Veneto in the early 16th century suggests that the level of anxiety over virginity was higher now than it had been in previous decades or centuries. And this is supported by Mintz's next comment. He condemns simple folk, quote, whose only source of honor is the honor they derive from the shame of their fellows. And this is why there are so many slanderers, end quote. This last comment points to another possible direction for future inquiry. Was honor, and therefore also slander, more of a problem, socially and culturally, in the early modern society than in the Middle Ages? And if so, why? So I'm throwing all of this on you. I'd be delighted to hear your comments and suggestions.
David, I want to congratulate you. It's a very provocative way of looking at these documents, but I have my reservations. First, I just want to say there's a nice little story here. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a minute. The nice little story is the one document which you read, you say is from the notaries, and is the only reference you have is from Kovetz Aliyah. Why? I have in the books that I published 2,000 documents that are consecutive. The notebooks are consecutive. The notaries are bound with documents, except for 1544 to 1547, when there are 105 folios missing. At number 833 in volume 1 of the Jews in Rome, you'll see I have a note to that effect. Now I know what happened to them. Berger walked out with them from the archive, and that's where they're from. They should be in that little facet over there.
Oh, I use that document because I knew it was part of your corpus.
No. I'm saying that it's just incredible that here is the great Berliner, and he must have walked here. He's amanuensis, walked out of the archives with 105 folio pages of these notaries. The notaries were discovered. So it's a great story. There are, by the way, I did write once 100. There are actually 59 documents that I have, 59 or 62 total. They're all identical. The cases are always the same, except for the one that you pointed out, and another one, number 1441. That one that you pointed out was 1419, and then 1441. I suggested that Tzachek could be sexual. It might not be, because the Tzachek is also the gamble constantly, right. and it means a lot of things. Just like I have the Takli Torah Torah, so I throw in Bilti Tahor and Mukat Ets, And you get all kinds of meanings that go from nocturnal emission, even to rape from the ability to hold. My problem with all this is whether it's defloration at all. And I think I tend to agree with Ron Crump. The problem is, if everybody so anxious to record it, how come you only have 60 cases over 100 years? I'd expect at least 360 cases over 100 years. So it's all exceedingly problematic. As far as violence, what I said here in the introduction to this essay on Shem Tov Soporta is that we should, if it was a purposeful manipulation, a cover-up, we must assume collusion on the part of Jewish authorities, again, over 100 years. So is it really a cover-up? Could it be incest too, by the way? My first thought was incest. So I talked to Diane Hughes and I talked to Natalie Davis, and we all raised our hands. We couldn't figure out anything on the basis of the text. So that, I'm very anxious to hear how we can go along with these things. By the way, they call themselves sofer matah. Right. That was the term they used for themselves. So that, indeed, I remain totally perplexed on these things. What exactly is occurring here? There were some kind of accidents. The girls run from age 2 to age 15. At least a quarter of them happen on a Shabbat, by the way. The witnesses, for some reason, in a lot of the cases, a man is listed as one of the witnesses too, not just these trustworthy women, which is the term which goes back, and you noted in your essay on the digital defloration. It's a fascinating essay, by the way, in Jewish Studies Quarterly.
Yeah.
And you know, the T-Gay's article where he retraces the term back to Qumran. So there are 10 million, I'm sorry I'm going on here, but this is a topic that I've written about a little, and it's a fascinating thing. I think it's true the notary's existence helps to explain why they're writing it down, and the notary's coming to existence in 1640 explains why we don't hear too much of it. But what in the world it means, Elohim Gadol.
Thank you very much.
I have a question about this even concept of accidental defloration. I mean, I don't know whether there's any documentation outside of this period, even contemporary, about accidental defloration. So I wonder whether it's just a construct to create some sort of responses so that the currency of virginity holds up. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts about. We don't have any doctors or anyone here, but.
I'm not saying about accidental declaration and I just wanted to say a parallel that struck me very strongly with the material I looked at with more than it was the 18th century recession on college students with nocturnal emission, which becomes almost an obsession in the political literature of the 18th century Polish Jews, and also relatively unexplained. Others has tried to see it in two different ways. One is a changing age structure. We have more young men who have more sexual, young men like their hormones and stuff, not going very further. But he tried that. The other thing he tried to talk about was maybe some change in piety in terms of where Jewish mysticism sees nocturnal emission and the threats that presents to society. I'm just wondering if it's a parallel, I can't really take it very far, but it seems to me that you have a similar kind of phenomenon, some kind of sexual anxiety that comes in a certain time and place. And maybe, I don't know, there are different ways of trying to approach it, than just looking at the simple question of
But the 16th century is a period where the marriage and the virginity becomes a really stronger currency. I don't know whether you cited this article, and I don't remember the author, but it was in the Quaderni Storici, and it was republished in the Ruggero
in the volume.
That's right,
That's
where you have that shift of responsibility on women for their own chastity, and then therefore shift on the value of virginity.
false accusation brings the community way down, that's the reference.
Right, and then you have, I mean, we talked about it, the Catholic Episcopal records that deal with problematic marriages where the questions of defloration is brought up, and so that's, I don't know what it would look like in Italy, but elsewhere. Alicia?
Just a brief comment for you to check. I'm almost certain that in Cenerena, in the story of Rebecca slipping off the camel, there's a whole to-do about her virginity.
I wrote about that in the article that Ken cited. But,
And to the point where it just seems as though the virginity is like a separate body part that can be detached. And then virginity lay over there, and over there. And it seems when I read your text, and her virginity fell onto her robe.
Right.
So this is like a piece of something. So,
David, tell them that's the text, tell them these texts, na flu betulim.
right. Or Nashul, you can find it.
The text say na flu betulim.
Right.
I've been watching these documents for 15 years and waiting for someone to write about them. And I really think you've done a fantastic job of framing the question. I would encourage you to continue with the documentary element, the formulary element. Why is it being written in the 16th century? And I think that's really a great way to go, especially thinking about the shifting from morality to written culture, all of these different kinds of documents. I think that's a terrific way to go. That said, I also think that we need, after I speak, to get Ruth to speak, because she told me in conversation that she's also seen these documents show up. And we have an instinct that it is a social and legal euphemism. These texts are, as I guess commonly thought, some sort of social and legal euphemism for other things that might have happened rather than quote accidental declaration. But in this phrase accidental declaration, I'm wondering if we could think of that as a social and legal euphemism for against her will. You see, it covers so many bases. To have, it's almost a brilliant, if you think of it as a written, a document that helps adapt a legal system which requires virginity. And it's a document which fits in now to protect girls, whether it was some sort of accident, rape, abuse, incest, or willful. I love that new contribution to willful, voluntary premarital sexuality. It becomes a legal written institution which is extremely pliable, valuable, and people in Italy apparently and in the Ottoman Empire they used it to their advantage for all different ways. It became a catch-all that for a short period of time people found useful ways to use.
I'm sure that's true. But here, again, the gender element is very important. This is not really the girl, none of these are the girl's story or the women's story. These are documents by men. I mean, Diana has to sign, right?
Maybe coming from women in the community. I mean, it's the women who are providing business.
Well, one of the questions I asked is, why the shift from the women witnesses to the male documents? This is something that's being taken over by men, which didn't used to be. Although Ken has just enlightened me. You just enlightened me that often the witnesses are men, or some of them are men.
It's always two women plus a man.
But the documents that, not just the Rome ones, the Pincas, the documents are male documents, right?
I wouldn't go that far. I mean, who's writing the document down? They're going to the
men.
No, it's the public record of the community.
Yeah, but
Okay.
men
That's men.
That's pushing the issue. I wouldn't.
The family, the father. This is the engine driving this machine
The women produce it.
is male.
The men are
And honor, just a second, virginity, and this is in all the literature, virginity is the property and the currency of the family. And the people who care about it are the men. There are money issues involved. It's not just a question of honor.
Wait a minute. The woman cares about it, that's the whole Shinto support story. I don't want to monopolize it, that's the whole Shinto support story. The girl has been falsely accused, and the whole community gets together to reward her. She gets an extra-cosette, not her father, not her uncle, as would have been the case among Christians. So I'm very hesitant about going to this whole thing, male documents, not male documents. It just doesn't sit well with me.
Our story is similar in terms of what happened to the girl. I mean, because maybe it's a pattern that people are inventing the story. I mean, because if it's very similar, as Ken says, and many of them occur in Shabbat. I mean, they're all, at least the one, the story that you brought, the girl falls down from either. So there are not other instances how she can lose her virginity or how.
Oh well, there's one. I mean, Ken can do them all by heart. But a girl is cleaning for Pesach. I mean, it's theme and variation. She has to fall down and land on that spot. Is it a fabrication? Are you asking me whether these are the incidents that happened or not?
I would try to look if you see a pattern that repeats, maybe they're trying to use a literary or some kind of pattern to write about it because this is the way to write about it.
Oh, okay. I mean, I don't know how that works in practice. In practice, what happens is women come and testify that they saw something happen. And that eventually gets noted down in one of these types of documents. So how does the fabrication theory work, Yaakov? I mean...
because if it's, I mean, you see that the stories are very similar, so I think it is a fabrication of some sort.
So what happens in practice? Okay, who?
I'm sure it's most of the cases are fabrication. It's sort of an insurance for girls, as you say. In the collection I was talking about, the Sefer Tikkun Sofrim, there are at least, as I remember, 3 formulas for these cases. And it always repeats, it's always the same form formula of statements. There are always two women because they run and
they summon them.
Two women in order to check the girl vaginally. So they need 2 women always. But the formula repeats all the time. And
okay, so
it's impossible that there were so many cases of girls who fell from their gas.
I don't. Wait, I have to stop you there. I don't know if it's impossible. I asked that question, and also the opposite. Ken asked that question, right? Why aren't there more, right? Why aren't there more? I don't know how possible. The fact that we have a formula in a formulary doesn't tell me that this is a fabrication. It does. The question that I'm trying to get beyond the question of what did or didn't happen to what did this mean in the society and culture that we're studying.
I don't know about all of this, but I'm just saying that there's a it strikes me that because you have a conventional formula, it doesn't mean it's a fabrication.
Right.
It may be the proper way to discuss something or to write something, but it doesn't mean it's completely fabricated. It's just very funny.
Just a very brief question, whether there's any way for the cases you said you have for 16th century Rome, is there any way for you to check which kind of social strata this girls came from or the family came from?
I defer to...
Probably not, but...
It's indiscriminate.
Tom? Bernie?
Am I correct in understanding that with the collective knowledge of all of the early modern worlds that we're talking about here, that really the Rome case is overwhelmingly the majority of the documents? Yes, we have some formulas. But you have, okay,
My
so,
formulas are from Salomon.
okay, but formulary texts are one thing, and
Ken's got empirical stuff.
actual notarized or actual things. In Pinkasim, I've been through a lot of Pinkasim, I don't
You don't find it. Right. Well, no, this is why, I mean, this material from Rome, from the Jewish notaries, is sui generis.
Right. So our question, therefore, if I understand correctly, really should focus. In other words, it's very interesting that you've got some rabbis from other places who testify in effect, Bronte, Diana, they're testifying that the phenomenon is happening elsewhere.
Right.
But it basically is a Roman phenomenon.
As a document, as a body of documents.
Well, right now, that's what we got. We sure don't have.
But wait.
If it were nearly as common, a phenomenon as a legal phenomenon, that is not that girls get accidentally or whatever deflowered, but if it were nearly as common a phenomenon that it happened, in addition to its appearance in a few formulary texts, it doesn't even appear in all formulary collections.
Right, Millie doesn't have it.
Right. But it would certainly be available in the, after all, fairly large amount of legal evidence that we have, stretching from the Middle Ages down to the modern period.
Right.
All in. So what we're really talking about is something that's happening in Italy. Now, as I say, it's a phenomenon.
It's posture. It's the full posture.
I have a question before you write that. The question is, can you put boundaries on the phenomenon, geographic and chronological, which would help us make a discussion?
I can't help you with geography. Ruth has helped me by pointing out that there's material beyond Italy, but would you agree with the 16th century? Yeah. So one of the questions I asked and repeated is, like, where have we all been? But as far as the documents are concerned, the textual point that I see is that there's something about genre that commands our attention, because this is a new genre. This doesn't exist. This Rome stuff, we don't have it for anywhere else. So the fact that you don't have it, I mean, yes, I don't understand why there aren't Shelot Utshuvot. There is no rabbinic literature on the problem of Mukat Ets, virtually none. And I don't understand why not. But I think one answer, or part of the answer, is the answer that focuses on text, on the document.
And the kind of document.
And the kind of document, which is unique.
Right, it's not just the uniqueness, I don't want to take, but the notary document is what's called a trustworthy public record. Laurie Nussdorfer of this university has written brilliant stuff on the Roman notaries and what they symbolize and what they mean. They are the formal official record. They're like the court records of today. And it's something indeed which apparently didn't exist. There may have been something in Spain, in late Spain, but nobody's actually pulled the material out. And these guys seem to invent the material. I talked about it elsewhere, I won't go into it. But there is reason to want to make a public record, because when an Ochel, like Shem Tov Seporto, who is impotent, talking about what's feminine, comes and says she wasn't a virgin, they find out that he was impotent. They get the whole story out. It's a rare case. You have the entire story from soup to nuts. And because of that, the thing is resolved. So that's a reason for doing this kind of thing, for instance.
Add some of the thoughts here. It seems to me that insurance policy this type of has sort of a lifespan. Namely, as it becomes more common, it becomes less valuable because it is more suspect. Right? We're not the only people who can suspect that this is a paragraph. Right? The enemies of the family will also suspect that. And the first one, the person who gets in first, has a clear shot because they invented something new, so it's a good cover-up. The 60th person already, they say, and it doesn't protect your honor much, and it isn't worth very much financially.
Good, thank you. That should happen. I mean, the only kind of reaction that sounds like that is Lamprunti, who says this can't really mean very much.
I have a question that maybe Ruth also could help by answering. Does this exist in the Muslim world? And when you said I didn't find this in the Christian world, I'm wondering if it exists in the Muslim world. Because if we have this kind of geographic distribution of the cases, that would be a question I would ask. And the other question that I thought was really interesting in your presentation is the kind of parallel development of the sheet the night after the consummation of the marriage, and this kind of insurance that parents have to take out. And I would really like to know more about, I don't know anything about this, the history of that sheet, or whatever virginity test you have the night after the consummation, the day after the consummation of the marriage, and to see how this kind of relates to this phenomenon.
The only thing I know about, I mean, I can't bring it past Ruth, I'm blanking. Ruth Langer's article. on Mukat Ets, to bring it from there to Mari Mintz, I don't know what, like I can't fill in that gap. But yeah, that's a good way to tackle it.
I realize this is a textual audience, but I don't think we're going to fall into the trap that if it isn't on paper, it doesn't exist. And so, if things erupt for various reasons in certain eras that occurred all along, but a phenomenon is, but then we have to say why the literary
right.
doesn't occur. So I just, there's an indication that it can only happen, and so lots of things happen that don't get in the record.
The question is, why does it suddenly appear in the record? That's
Why is it there?
Mary. Yeah.
Do we have anything about how often it was used, or do we have any evidence or any testimonies that these insurance policies were
I don't know of any evidence about that. In other words, about who actually went and used it. I don't know anything about that.
I guess it's just sort of picking up on Thompson too, that the things are kind of, we talked about neighborhood networks and about people simply talking to one another, and as neighbors talk to each other, they say, well, we just did this, and maybe we should have that sort of thing too, so that you get this kind of, you seem to kind of be looking in written text, whereas it's not in the written literature. Well, it's not trickling down from there that people say, I've been reading responsum, therefore we should go off and do this. It's they talk to their neighbors, and their neighbors said, well, we just had this done.
Exactly.
Or these notaries.
Right, this document is not a top-down thing.
And these are not free for people to get these notaries, right? I mean, they're being paid for these documents. So what you do is you go out and drum up. It's an insurance policy. Like any insurance agent, you try to sell these things, except it's the notary that makes the money. I mean, I don't want to talk about it, but when people hear from their neighbors, well, gosh, now I've had this, and the fact that no neighbors up in Worms heard this, or that even nobody invests, because it wasn't like fashion. I mean, or well, I don't mean it's a fabrication that you decide to write it down rather than you decide to
right, or a construct.
Yeah, but you hear about it from your neighbor, and you say, we better have one of those.
This last comment suggests resourcefulness, and that's one line of interpretation, resourcefulness, the insurance policy, which makes a lot of sense. On the other hand, we've heard a number of comments which seem to suggest anxiety and a moral panic. So I don't know if those two could be put together, if they're necessarily very different kinds of interpretation. So that's just one reaction. And secondly, on premarital sex and Jewish fondling, of course, David Beale has written about this in Central and Eastern Europe. I forget.
What did he say?
What?
What did he say?
There was a lot more of it than we assumed.
And what kinds of sources? I'm sorry, I should go read it, but...
I'll send you the reference. I don't remember it at the moment. Well, if it's available, then
Thanks, Lois. Thank you.
Ronnie and then Mary, and then we'll probably have to finish.
Personally, I tend not to accept the thesis of the simulation and lies in regard to this procedure, because we are talking about something which is very, very difficult to hide, in the sense that when such girls supposedly or not lose their virginity, they would be undressed naked by two women exactly at the same moment, and only in these circumstances would this deed would carry value.
But that's orchestrated.
Let me finish. The same process we know from Jewish marriages, and when a Jewish woman enters the bed before the consummation, which is done exactly the same moment of the wedding day, she would be undressed by women, completely naked, and this is a completely normal procedure. So we're not talking about something which is virginity in general. We are talking about a procedure which is very, very exact and very well known, and is conducted by a certain group of women, which is called sage women, which I would say Nashim Chachamot, which I would guess it is a translation of the Salshma. But I'm not sure about that.
Okay, we'll have to finish unless you have a brief and succinct and poignant comment, and then we're ending. That's it. Yes.
We haven't been talking about realms of women and realms of men, but I think that in Ronnie, in your comment that the women undressed the woman and that this was done exactly this way, I think that sort of excludes the possibility that women were allowed to have control of that sphere. and men accepted their testimony and had formulas to relate how they, in legal terminology, how the women accomplished these facts and these deeds. But I don't think that we know for sure what women did or what women saw. We only know what the men permitted them to declare, what realm they gave them to be experts in.
Okay, ending on that note.